Hello. My name is Jenny Teed, and I would like to officially welcome you tonight to this web event. We are hosting this event with MUSHIN, the Michigan Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Network, and Showing Up for Racial Justice. MUSHIN is a statewide organization that primarily works with Unitarian Universalist churches around social justice, but also works interfaith and across the state with all kinds of folks and justice issues. I work as a consultant with environmental and racial justice, and we also have folks working with us on Get Out the Vote and women and family justice and LGBTQ justice, disability justice. So we are your justice folks, and you can find us at www.uujustice.org to learn more about the work that we do, to sign up to receive emails from us, and certainly to make a donation to our small, nonprofit, community-led work. I would like to introduce you to my friend Darryl, who will tell you about our Surge chapter that's co-hosting.
Hello, my name is Darryl, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice, or as we call it, SURGE. SURGE National is a network that brings white people into fights for racial and economic justice through community organizing, mobilizing, and education to undermine white supremacy and build people power through multiracial communities. And you can find more information about the national organization at surge.org. But we also have our unique Metro Detroit chapter, which started in 2015 after the murder of Michael Brown. And in our collective equity work towards collective liberation, we build relationships with each other and with BIPOC-led organizations and movements such as Black Lives Matter Detroit and Michigan Liberation. We are guided by 7 values: accountability, collective action, connection, learning, respect, sustainability, and intersectionality. The group is open to anyone who wants to be a part of it, and you can find more information about our local chapter at our link tree. And I also have a few announcements today regarding our accessibility for tonight's meeting. If you'd like to modify your name to include your pronouns, you can do this by clicking on participants in the bottom toolbar, then hovering over your name in the participant side panel and clicking more and selecting rename. Live captions and transcriptions are also available. To access these options, you can select captions in the bottom toolbar. If you don't see the option, you can click more on the bottom right and then select your preference. Throughout the event, please remain muted unless speaking. When using the chat, please only message everyone for introductions, sharing resources, or submitting questions, which we will address at the end of the event for Q&A time. If you have any accessibility requests that come up, please message our co-host directly, who will be monitoring the chat. This event is scheduled until 8:30 p.m. and there aren't any scheduled breaks, but we do recognize that people have different needs. So please take care of your needs throughout our time together, whether that means getting into a comfortable position, turning your camera off, getting up to move around, or get a glass of water, whatever shows up for you. And in case you're away from your computer for a period of time, as Jenny already said, we've started the recording and we will be sharing that after the event. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it back to Jenny.
Thank you. So just a little bit more in-depth welcome to this event tonight. This is Decolonize Your Mind 3. This is the 3rd web event that Mushin and Surge have co-hosted. Jaike has been on all 3 of our events with a fellow friend or comrade each time, sharing personal and historical experiences of Native Americans growing up in Michigan and around this country. If you have been to a Surge event and also many Unitarian Universalist events, they often start with a land acknowledgement. And so I just wanted to make note of that today and let you know that I made a personal decision to not start with a land acknowledgement today, even though this is a Native American event and many of you would expect that to be the beginning. I've just been doing some deeper thought, and I think we all do, and need to have some more conversations. And we may even talk a little bit more about that this evening. Michigan Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Network learned from our statewide membership that Unitarian Universalists, many who had been doing land acknowledgement statements in their congregations, were really looking to take that a step further and do some real work beyond just reciting words in their church, and reached out to Mustin to say, hey, how could you help us to do some deeper work here? And so that's when this work started about a year ago. And we are feeling good about the invitations that we've had some people go out to speak to congregations, and referrals for more information and organizations to get connected with and where to make donations. And so I'm feeling good that people are taking this really seriously, and the way that people are showing up tonight shows that. It was really exciting for me to see and to share with our guests that when I was looking at the registration information that you all provided, that we have not just Unitarian Universalists showing up, but we have folks who identify as Jewish, Methodist, and Episcopal. And so that's just really exciting interfaith work that we're doing tonight. And we have folks from as far as Iowa joining us tonight. So that was exciting to me as well. I don't want to take too much time. The women that are joining us tonight are full of some solid, deep information. And so I want to turn it over to them. We've had some conversation about what to discuss tonight, and they're going to kind of take it where they want to go. I might ask some questions that I know that other folks are interested in, and there will also be opportunity for folks in the room to ask questions too. I want to remind you, especially if you are a white settler, of the privilege that you have, and to listen more than you talk tonight, and to think before you speak more than you might usually. I'm grateful that my friends and comrades are here to open themselves up. They're ready for the hard questions. They realize that you don't know what you don't know, but I have been in spaces with them before when white folks have said or asked some things that kind of made me think twice about how I'm inviting people into space. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you, Hadassah and Jake. And Hadassah, I'm just going to have you kick it off for us. Let me spotlight you.
Yeah. Hadassah Greensky, Indigenous Cause. Nija Mashiknak no Gamoak in the go. Wawi Antanong and Dot. Shike and the Dam. Wagana Casino Dao go Quay and Dao. Bonjour and Dinaway Maganuk. Hello, my relatives. So that is a traditional greeting in Anishinaabe Moan. And that's the greeting that we use to relate to each other. And what I said in that greeting was, you know, what my name is. I'm called Hadassah Greensky. My spirit name is Two Turtles Singing, and I live in Detroit. I'm Turtle Clan, Snapping Turtle Clan, and I am from the Little Traverse Bay Bands, which is up in Petoskey, Harbor Springs area. So yeah, I really, I'm just gonna kind of like, yeah, we're just gonna have like some really casual, real, I think, moments to talk about some really important things. And I'm really grateful that Jenny brought up, you know, land acknowledgements, because when I talk to most natives about land acknowledgements, it's always kind of like, oh, land acknowledgements, that's still happening. You know, it's kind of a cringy thing. And the reason is, well, it's a little bit exhausted at this point without there being you know, like real connection to community, or sometimes it becomes like this scripted phrase that gets said before things, and it's not usually ever explained. It just kind of is. Like when we say our land acknowledgement here, a lot of times we're like, we acknowledge we're on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe, the Three Fires Confederacy, which is the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi. Okay, what if you don't know who those people are, or know why that's in place, or certain like there's a historical context that I think is missing, where I think we can kind of replace land acknowledgements with, I think, two things I'd like to see happen. One of them is, I think I'd really like to see that space be opened up for an opportunity for more education around that land, you know, and it doesn't have to be, you know, really in depth. It would be beneficial. But if instead of a land acknowledgement, maybe you know, you work towards incorporating a more accurate history, reading a book, something in a way that everybody knows what land they're already on, as opposed to being told this before, like where we get at a point where every single person knows whose land they're on. So that being said, I'm kind of like rhetorically wondering how many people know what land they're on. And there's ways you can find this up or look this up. You can Google search. There's a website, I think it's native-land.ca, if I'm not mistaken. And you can put in your hometown. I think you can even put, oh, thank you, Jake. Yes, you got it. And you can look up, maybe you have a family in a certain town, and you can look up, you know, in that certain town, whose land that is. And then you can go tell those relatives. I think it's a pretty cool thing. I've really like put in, for sure, Jake. I've really put in, you know, anywhere and everywhere that I've been into that map. It's really, really useful. And a lot of times I do have a connection with those Native people. So that comes to the second thing. So the first thing I really feel like we need is that education moment, right? But the second thing is to develop genuine connections or support for Native people, Native groups, in particular grassroots organizations. You know, to me, that is the most in line with who we are as people, is in supporting those small, impactful groups. Also, sorry, it's very loud on my corner. This corner acts like it's Friday night every night. So it's like one of those cruising corners. So everybody's out here all the time. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say, just to start an introduction. We're going to get into a lot of things. I'm just going to be kind of rattling off the top of my head. I really feel that, you know, I don't really plan these things. Because I also have faith that the spirits are gonna bring out what needs to be said, and I just become that vessel. And you know, a lot of people seem to fancy my rants, so we're gonna keep going with that. And I have a lot of knowledge and a lot of things to share, and I'm also excited to hear your questions. But I'm gonna pass it over to Jake. And thanks, Jenny, for having me here too, by the way.
Thanks for that opening, Hadassah. O Kongu Washte Omane Winyan, that translates to walks the good road woman in Lakota. I'm from the Fort Peck territories, are my homelands. I'm enrolled out of Mandan, Hadassah, Sanish tribes in North Dakota, which are also genetically my homelands. I'm living here in Detroit, otherwise known as Wawiatanong, otherwise known as Detroit, and have spent a lot of time out in Coast Salish territory on the Pacific Northwest side of this island. Yeah, to add on to the land acknowledgement discussion, the reason why it feels kind of performative to natives is because there's not a lot of action that comes along with the land acknowledgement. We hear somebody stand up and say, I know the land that I live on, but it don't mean shit to me, you know, like I cuss a lot, so just be prepared for that. But the what comes with that, it's like entering into somebody's home and raising your hand and said, well, I acknowledge this is your house, and then just staying there and then doing nothing, right? Like not doing anything to like heal the fact that you just walked in on somebody's home and decided to take up residence. So what are the actions that follow? Out in occupied Duwamish territory in Seattle, they had rent people paid rent to the Duwamish because they still don't have enrollment. They don't have like they don't have federal recognition, which is a very dangerous thing if you're a Native American tribe, which is unfortunate because we are all valid. The tribes that have been here since millennia, not one of us should be federally recognized in order to get access to resources and the ARPA funds that come through that are supposed to help bolster our tribes. But they are one of those tribes where there's 1 million people living on their lands, and they can't get access to PPE gear when there's a pandemic. So yeah, a land tax, I'm a fan of that in terms of, if you're gonna settle somewhere and you have not had that discussion with your local natives about being on their land and having that very honest conversation, pay the rent for being there. This is all stolen land if you are a settler descendant. My talks are very, very direct like that. They can be hard, they can be confrontational. Oftentimes to white people, I'm really, really happy to see this many white folks in this meeting. It's not to scare you off. It's not to run you off at all. It's we have to be very honest about what's going on in the relationship between settler descendants and Native American communities right now, because the situation is so dire and a lot of people don't understand what's going on. And it is the end result of hundreds of years of genocide that natives are dying every day, and not to normal, to preventable incidents that happen all around us. So that's why my talk is so direct. And that is a part, to me, of decolonizing in American culture. We want to tiptoe around things. There's a nature of being very polite and very digestible, in terms of we don't want to rock the boat. White culture, I grew up, I have a white mother. I'm very entrenched in white culture. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to especially be a femme in that culture. And you are supposed to take your burden and shut up and walk through this life, and not have to speak up about patriarchy, not have to speak up about colonization and never all the harms that have come from it. But I am my father's daughter, and I owe this to all the ancestors that walked before me, that suffered before me, but that made sure that I got here to do the work of educating people and acknowledging the harms that have happened to Native Americans thus far in American history, so-called American history. So I do thank you all for being here. I've got either a very informed and educated talk tonight or a very impromptu, spirit-led talk. It could go either way. So
I vote for the spirit-led, because I think personally what would be cool is if we can also just have like a conversation about some of this and talk about this, and some of it's presented, but that can get kind of dry sometimes, because the other thing too, that's a reality of us being on this call that happens when we are in non-Native communities is a thing called code switching. And I feel like to get to more honest conversations, we try to lean away from some of that code switching. And we're not like being mean or anything, it's just more like just having a more authentic way of talking. And so I want to encourage that for you too as well, Jaike. Just let's just be authentic and be very relaxed and honest. Like, I got a lot of historical facts too, like one thing I would like to lay out is a little bit of the history, but I also want to talk about some just maybe some cool projects and inspiration around land back. If I can ask really quick, because I forgot, what was kind of talked about in the last couple of sessions, so I don't get too repetitive?
Last one was MMIW. We
okay.
a lot on that. And then the first,
awesome.
Yeah, I think was really just a off the cuff decolonization talk in terms of, whiteness and how it presents itself, where it stems from in terms of westernized culture. I think, was that right, Jenny, for the first one?
Yeah, and on that first one, we also had someone speak about mascots.
Yep.
Oh, okay, awesome. So Well, let me talk a little bit about, we're talking about land back and like what that means, right? And this is kind of a word that's gaining a lot of popularity in the last couple of years. I even seen, if anyone watches the show Res Dogs, I've seen a hilarious clip about land back, which I wish, if I had thought about it earlier, I would have like hooked it in and played it, just because I think it's hilarious bit of humor. But basically it's a man and his wife. The wife, or the man passes by the sign and it's been graffitied with land back. And they're from like, what is it, Kansas, Oklahoma, one of those two states, Oklahoma. So they got that like Oklahoma accent. And he turned to his wife, he said, land back, what do you suppose that means, honey? And she said, well, we stole their land. You know, we stole all their land. And he's just like, what do you mean, you think they want it all back? She's like, well, honey, I happen to be part Indian myself, and I think that they deserve their land back. It was just like very wholesome and very like funny to me. Yeah. I think that I haven't heard people panic too much about it, but I don't think land back is about like, we're coming for your house. Like, no, like it's a little more gracious than that. And it can be, at least. And I think for us to really understand, just understand about how we got here a little bit. Like, we can't go through all the history, but we can go through some of it. Just a little bit about like the concept of land. Like, that's a really good way to start, because I feel like a lot of people, maybe they don't have like the context of how this all happened. So it's kind of been said that we shared the land with, you know, the settlers, and, you know, they basically just like bought property from us. Happy story. Like, I've heard that narrative absolutely told before. So what happened was, or we traded it for like whiskey, and it was kind of like on us because we traded it for so little of things. So you have to understand that for our people, like I think I can even generalize, you know, from what I've learned from others, is that, you know, pretty much all native people on Turtle Island don't believe in land ownership. Like, this concept's very foreign, pre-colonially, right? This concept's very foreign. So like, owning land would be like trying to own a cloud. Like, nature is nature. And so as long as you are receiving enough, you know, and you are being nourished, and there's reciprocation, you're stewards of the land, you care for that land, and you give back to that land. And, you know, different natives were doing things like prescribed burns way back then, or like, you know, even habitat restoration, or, you know, all these things are like indigenous sciences that were being practiced completely pre-colonially. Yeah. And so then we get to the colonizers. In Michigan specifically, they basically had meetings with us, and we're like, hey, we want land. The colonizer said, right? They're like, we want land. We want to buy it from you. And they're like, what? Like, you can just like have it? What do you mean buy land? Like, just use it, like everybody else. Just use it, right? And they're like, well, and so I think in a lot of our natives' minds, like, we thought, oh, they're just giving this stuff to us as a form of like keeping the peace, you know? Whereas we didn't understand the finality of something like buying land, that is yours, there's boundaries now. So this, on top of the fact that we would have meetings with the colonizers while drinking whiskey, was a large part of the history here. And when we signed our treaties, it was usually over whiskey. So there is a series of treaties in Michigan. I believe the first one that was ever signed here in Michigan with our people was in 1794, and it was the Jay Treaty. This treaty is still binding international law, even though Canada doesn't want to admit it. that basically gives us free roam of the land, tells us, you know, as long as we're a stone's throw from the water, we have rights around that. And it even specifically says that an Indian without a license has a better right to be on the land than one with one. And yeah, you know, so this treaty seemed to be, you know, it still took away some rights, but it was probably one of the most sound treaties at that point. It all went downhill from there. So in like 1818, there was a treaty that was signed here in, that basically ceded some of the land away to the colonizers. So yeah, so these different treaties basically gave up areas like southeastern Michigan. There's the Treaty of Springwells that gave up a large part of Detroit and downriver. And all these treaties started happening. And as the colonizers were giving us gifts for using the land, a lot of it was whiskey, which then in turn got our people addicted to alcohol. It was the first real contact of that addiction to alcohol. And then in, let me double check really quick. So I don't know if a lot of people know, but when Andrew Jackson was president, he actually signed something into play. It was a real law. And usually we only read about like one sentence of it in like high school history, and then it moves on. But this is pretty significant. In 1830, he signed something called the Indian Removal Act. Okay, things really started moving after that. Okay. So from here, you know, southeastern Michigan started having settlements. There was still a handful of Indian villages around, but we were starting to get pushed out. And then from there, there was the Indian Removal Act. So basically this made it legal for anyone to start killing natives. Oh geez, Jake said it only won by 5 votes in Congress. Of course it did. It was so
the entire history. Go ahead.
It was so brutal, you know, that even like the colonizers were like, I don't know about this, some of them. Yeah, no, Andrew Jackson was one of the worst presidents in American Indian history. Yeah, so around that time in Michigan specific history, in 1938 was something called the Potawatomi Trail of Tears, or Potawatomi Trail of Tears, or it was also known as the Trail of Death. And so this was where a large part of our Anishinaabe people were taken out of the Great Lakes and pushed to Oklahoma, Kansas area. So we have relatives out there. They're the Citizen Potawatomi Band. There's Prairie Island Band, and then there's also an Odawa Band, Ottawa Band out there. And so those are Anishinaabe people who were removed all those generations ago. So you have all these different fronts going now. You have the Indian Removal Act. Some of our people are getting removed. So the reason that they were essentially removed was because they did not convert to Christianity and willfully choose to assimilate and under United States law own land properly. So those of us that disagreed, those were the ones who were put on that trail of death, on that trail of the Potawatomi Trail of Tears. And the ones that stayed were only allowed to stay because they had converted to Christianity, became missionaries or ministers themselves. And then, then the government did something called land allotments. So land allotments, basically everybody, like my tribe and Little Traverse Bay bands, every single tribal family got 100 acres. And so it was deeded to them from the United States, which is, if we actually think about it, kind of really wild that the people who stole your land are now deeding you back your own land. Now, when they deeded us the land, they did not explain the concept of taxes to us. So they expected our people to pay taxes on our own land without explaining how to pay taxes. And so the result of that, to this day in 2024, out of the 300 something families in my particular tribe, there is one family left with a portion of their original allotment because everybody else lost it through evasive tax laws. They were made so that we couldn't understand them because the US government didn't intend us to ever own our own land. And so because of that, in today's world, in today's society, the idea of land back is so extremely radical when you really think about the historical context of it. I'm gonna let Jake talk for a second here too.
That a lot of that coercion, right, it's not like people went down without a fight, Native Americans, right? It was like we fought and fought and fought over and over and over again. You know, the origin of Thanksgiving comes from giving thanks for another part of a tribal band being killed. It's not about natives and pilgrims coming together, sharing food. It was about pilgrims being thankful that more of the savages were dead, and smallpox blankets, and you know, fighting back. We didn't have guns for centuries, right? Like we didn't have modern warfare techniques. Therefore, we didn't expect kind of what was coming. We were people that traded with each other, with other tribes. We didn't just hold slaves. We didn't just war with other tribes like the white narrative likes to think that we did. We warred only if it was absolutely necessary, right? Because we were people of the land who understood the value of life and how hard it was to live a day-to-day existence living on the land without the, you know, quote unquote technology of modern Britain at the time, of how far France and Western Europe had come in terms of, you know, industrial revolution. We valued life, and that was a core tenet of every Native American tribe. You could ask every single one of them, they all value life. So it's not like we didn't try to fight back. It was the language was in a language we couldn't understand, and we had been beaten over and over and over. Our children and our women had been purposely murdered to defeat the spirit of the warrior, to the point where that warrior was gonna, you know, they were gonna fight to the death. But over time, if all of these different, you know, alcohol, smallpox blankets, they're murdering you for stealing eggs because they're not sending you rations, systematically coming and trying to destroy you. Over time, you have to take what you can get, right? So it was a lot of unfairness, a lot of unjustness, a lot of corruption, which this is why we are in the state we are in today in this country, is because this entire country is born on bloodshed. You know, anything that is settlerism and the way that things went down, there's so much discord in the spirit of everyone walking around. And we feel that. I think we feel what happened to the Native American here. And there's a sense of, you know, we're all pretty discombobulated about it. We're all disenfranchised. We're definitely not healthy as a society. You know, any society that's still on board with killing children in a school setting because we don't want to, like, you know, illegalize guns to the point where children are safe, that tells you everything you need to know. That our children are expendable, our children and our elders, you know, dying in nursing homes with family never coming to visit them. We don't honor these traditions of taking care of those people that brought us into the world and giving back to our communities. And all this started with the doctrine of discovery. And I'll read just a little excerpt of where this came from and where it stems from, that westernized white society thinks that this was all okay. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am always with you to the very end of the age." This was a section of the scripture known as the Great Commission. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it." Try to conquer it. We didn't believe in conquering land. We believed in a relationship with the land, in stewarding the land, in making sure the land was cared for. We didn't believe in coming and raping resources from the land for technology, for capitalism. So we've got this huge dichotomy of belief systems that are about to clash in a really, really big way. And they're going to destroy both societies at one point, but initially destroy the Native American society. Have dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. The doctrine of discovery, formalized in the papal bulls of the 13th and 14th centuries, specified that the entire world was under the jurisdiction of the entire jurisdiction of the earth was under a pope. One guy, one human ass being was the leader. You have to be fucking delusional to believe that that's ever okay.
I have a point to make just really quick. Like, for modern Christians, because I do hear about Christians wanting to come to a more, like, I've even heard decolonial Christianity, like, sure, you know, whatever floats your boat. But I understand what is being said there. I understand what is a more genuine form of Christianity. You have to understand that by the time the Bible got here into the hands of these people, this is after the canonization of the Bible. Who canonized the Bible? It was King James, right? And now you have to realize that a lot of the scriptures are very strategically picked to support this particular doctrination, right? You have to understand that the reason that Paul in the New Testament, he actually takes up the majority, I feel like, of the New Testament. Paul was a Roman. The Roman Empire were some of the biggest colonizers of the times. So it is very fitting that King James would put in all these books and all these different scriptures that would line up with an illiterate public who listened to a monarchy. Okay, so now you have that form of Christianity. This is no longer the disciples in the catacombs. This is no longer a more genuine community, which I really do believe that they once had. This is going on to understanding that religion has now been corrupted into a form of dominion. This is a symptom of colonization. So this is the doctrine that they are using. They're using every part of the Bible to push forward their narrative. And you can even say it's cherry picking. It's already been cherry picked since it was canonized.
And on that, any land not Christianized, not under the sovereignty of a Christian ruler, could be possessed on behalf of God. All time and space was considered empty until Christians arrived with God's truth. Until then, it was terra nullius. Previously, it existed in a dark, wild, and timeless existence of absolutely no significance. And this is the passage that granted church officials permission to colonize when and where they saw fit. So they thought, we out here in the dark ages, we don't know science, we don't know technology, we don't know how to garden, we don't know how to live millennia, you know, survive thousands and thousands of years because of this doctrine. And terra nullius, the manifest destiny and westward expansion is all based on ideological systems of belief that are, you know, essentially white man liveth, white man taketh, you know, like he gets to have what he wants. And, you know, once Europe was overpopulated and, you know, that led to poverty for their people because there wasn't opportunity, there wasn't, you know, a system, they'd lost their way. And then they see this, you know, whole country over here, this whole continent that was quote unquote undiscovered. The fact that they brainwashed, you know, and they were so brainwashed to think that we can have that because God says it. It's a different kind of denial, I think, and a different kind of, you have to be very okay with murder. You have to be very okay with corruption. You have to be okay with that. And I have to say that, not that I hate Christianity or Christian people, because I know a lot of great Christians, you know, that are doing good work out there and that really are living the word of Jesus Christ. It's that is the root of how we have ended up where we're at today. All of this started in Native communities and Native culture with a God that said that this is how it was supposed to go down, and us not having an understanding of Christianity. We couldn't fight back, and there's millions of people landing here, you know, pilgrimage to come here, that were escaping persecution, coming here for freedom, that thus, you know, tortured us from their persecution. So a lot of a lack of understanding, a lack of like, they don't see that everything had been developed here. Just because we didn't have big, tall buildings like they did in England didn't mean that we hadn't been stewarding the land, didn't mean that we hadn't been properly caring for the land. And that's where that thought process of that we were savage, you know, hedonistic, we went around half clothed,
I like how they write about us sometimes. Like, I can't remember whose writing it is, but it's with such awe, like just complete awe. They're like, the natives, they share all their things. They're just completely open with each other. This is like such a foreign concept to them, you know, because everything's ownership, dominion, control. That is colonization. You know, the idea of somebody being able to come into your unlocked house and borrow whatever they need from you is absurd. And obviously it also wouldn't work in today's world. But, you know, alas, like this very concept is just like mind blowing to the colonizers. Oh, something else that made me laugh too, that they wrote about was how clean we were. We like took baths daily, and like the old like European settlers were like taking baths like once a month and putting on oil, hoping for the best. Like, I'm not sure what happened. I'm sorry for those that are European descended, but I don't know what your ancestors were doing. There's some stinky ancestors. I got European ancestry. There's some stinky ancestors in the line, okay? I don't know why, but yeah, no, it was really funny how they wrote about us. And like, even like, again, like you said, Jake, like dehumanized us and said that we were just like, what they call this, like a theory or something. I can't remember what the terminology is, but just like, it was just pure chaos here before the colonizers came and restored it to order. Okay. You have to realize that the leaders, the first leaders of this country, the first colonizers, the first ones in those like the old Jamestown and all them settlements, those people were kind of like kind of living off of their Moses in the desert, you know, wandering around the desert kind of fantasy. You know, it was very much like we're wandering too and we're lost, so now we're going to go find our home. Like, they kind of idolized Moses and used a lot of his ideology to, like, you know, again, like justify that same manifest destiny, because that's what Moses did with the Israelites, and that's how you got the kingdom of Israel, you know. And that's the same reason that, you know, you got all the things going on in Palestine, because they kicked out the Palestinians because they're like, oh, God told us we had to be here. This has been happening historically in the Bible, and then of course it naturally happened here. I want to read this comment real quick.
Right. And the fact that, you know, people are willing to, we see what's going on with Palestine right now, you know, people in hospital tents being burned alive. Like, that takes a different kind of psychology to get to that place that you're willing to do that to a human being. And that is what comes from being so desperate for property and resources so that you can have wealth. Like, that's at the end of decolonization, is that greed and that capitalism have just destroyed the psyche of too much of a population of the globe, to the point where either you're pro-Israel or you're pro-genocide if you're not pro-Palestine. And that is still the same discussion needs to be had here. We're still in a genocide here. You can walk into any IHS and see the medical racism that happens there, of natives that walk in that don't walk out because they weren't treated properly, because they were native and they happened to be treated by a white nurse out on a reservation and looked upon as if they were a drunken, addicted, worthless human being. Amongst all of the other, you know, highest domestic violence rate, highest police murder rate, highest dropout rate, we can't get our kids through high school, let alone through college, to get to upward mobility. And in that, you've got kids that don't feel skilled, they don't have self-esteem, self-worth. And if their tribe is highly Christianized, they haven't come back to their traditions to find out who they are, to learn their language, to learn, you know, that they're important, whether they get a 4-year degree or not. But at the same time, they live in a colonized world where if they don't have a skill set, they will continue that cycle of poverty that exists on reservation lands per law. There was a law put into place in the 60s that said that Native Americans couldn't own land on reservations. This fuckery has been going on for so long, and it's so insidious in terms of all the laws, the Homestead Act, the Indian Removal Act, all of the laws that have been put in place to systematically remove Indians and their rights and their sovereignty. We got treaties, but they don't mean a damn thing. The American government has broken treaties every year since treaties have been signed. They do not take
international law, breaking
eminent
international
domain.
law.
Yep, they use excuses that this is needing to happen for the public good. Therefore, they're going to do what they're going to do. It doesn't matter. What do we do? Fight your government. Fight your government. And I know that sounds like a big task. Take these talks that we give you and go disperse them out into community. You know, take this education. I've sent a list of books, I think, to Mary last week or 2 weeks ago. Take those books and get them out to as many people as possible to learn the true history of what happened, because you have to understand what went down in history to understand your part in it as a settler, so that you can do the work to bring healing to what is left of Native America, because we are so few in number. We're doing a lot of heavy lifting as natives, right? Like, we're trying to survive out here in systemic oppression while also having to educate white people all over. And it's the information is out there, the books are out there, but get them from Native Americans, because there's also a lot of like white text that's been written from the, yes, Marie, that's like what I'm talking about. That document right there, I think, has a list of at least 15 books in it, plus another list that I threw on at the end. So those books have the discussions, honestly, about where in your descendancy, your settlerism started. Was it a great-great-great-grandfather that served in the army that hunted down the buffalo that came out and killed the food source of the Native America? Was it back in Plymouth? Was it later on, you know, in the 50s when they came over and, you know, saw an opportunity for jobs and wealth? Find where in your lineage that happened, and then work from there in terms of like, how can I turn this around? What do I need to do to bring healing to the native land that I live on, and contribute back as a settler who's living on stolen land, who's had access to upward mobility that maybe you wouldn't have had in other parts of the world, because America is so great that if you enjoy the life you have, if you know, have any speck of what America has given you because of settlerism, analyze that, take a very, very good look at it, and then see how you need to like give that back to Native Americans. We just want our sovereignty.
I want to jump in. Thank you. Education piece is super important, and I feel like I've been working really hard at educating out, and I personally haven't been doing enough of that inner work. There's one story that I love and I love to share and tell, and I'll share it with you guys some other time. It makes me feel good about what my ancestors may have been doing in Michigan, but that's like, I don't want to go beyond that story, but I recognize that I need to, and I'm glad to hear that from you today, and I'm going to work on that. I know that there's going to be some folks that want some time for some questions and discussion, and also know that both of you are aware of some of the examples around both land tax. I know even there may be people here as we open up the conversation later at the Traverse City Unitarian Universalist Church. I know that there's some folks that are looking into land tax for their church, and someone I talked to there, you know, pointed out that churches particularly are nonprofit organizations here, and so why we don't have to pay taxes to the government, so let's make a place to pay our tax to the, you know, original people of that land. Are there more models of that? Land back?
Yes.
I heard a lot. Yeah, jump in. Thank you.
I want to talk about Segorite. Segorite is out of the Bay Area, and they work on Ohlone land. And I really like their model a lot, and I feel like they've been really inspiring other folks around the country. I've been to some of their events out there and just kind of like pick their brain on how some things work. So basically they set up an organization, a council. I believe it's a 501c3, which is a bit of a drag because if any sort of independence from the system we can possibly get, I'll take it, but that's okay. I understand that we need our system sometimes to get work done. So it's a 501c3. They basically have they have like a website. You can sign up and basically pay like a monthly or yearly tax. And when they get enough people together, they actually put that money towards literal land back. So they buy their land back in the Bay Area. They work with the city to get some of it back. Historical sacred sites, some of that, the fundraising that they put out on their website, they also get for occupation and for support, like things like the shell mounds in Oakland. So that's a huge inspiration. I would look at their website and check out, just what they got going on, because I would love to start something like that here in Detroit, because to be honest, of the hundreds, maybe even like 1,000 natives that I know, like I can only think of like 2 or 3 that are landowners. And that's a huge issue. That's a huge, huge issue. It like, I think about the impact of land almost on a daily, because it is that big. There's so many things that going into like land being in Native people's hands. Like it's MMIW prevention work. It's mental health. It's getting people out of survival mode because now they have a place to call their own. It's brings self-determination to communities because they can come together and help build up that land. I prefer, if there is land, or if somebody wants to talk about that, I would recommend finding not a tribal nation, but individual people that are working in either just individuals doing good work, or maybe finding a descendant of that land through historical research, or finding a grassroots organization to give that land to. Unfortunately, we are a traumatized people, and a lot of the systems that are mirrored off after the colonial systems tend to fail our people, and they tend to not be as impactful as giving to like a grassroots organization or individual, because that is really where the community is. It's not in these organizations, it's not in these tribal governments, but out of ignorance, a lot of people will like, call the tribal government. They'll try to give it back to the tribe. But that never reaches the hands of the people. Just being blunt, it just doesn't. It might become the tribe's next casino or condo project, like honestly. So that also ties into knowing people in the community, so having real relationships with people, it's not we can be together more in community and still just make really impactful work happen without it being so formal, but
Hadassah,
check it out.
yeah, I look forward to learning more about that. And I also wanted to just make a note for our people who are our viewers today and people who will view this in the future. If you've been on our calls before, our Zoom meetings, particularly for this session, but usually we invite folks from the community in, Motion pays them a very small love offering for all that they're willing to give us. And direct donations are best to people and organizations that you know. I'm sure that Jaike and Hadassah are going to be open to you reaching out to them about people and organizations they know. But I would like it if Jaike and Hadassah would each put their personal way to donate to them immediately, whether it's a Cash App or a Venmo, some kind of way if people want to send you a love offering directly instead of buying their Starbucks all week or whatever the case may be, for being here with you tonight. Not buying Starbucks anyway, right? We're supporting Palestine, or not buying Starbucks, but you get my drift.
Exactly. right. I know what you mean. Yeah, I would I'd be down to put some of that. I would be honored and thankful to receive some of that, because all of my work is just community supported, and also just like organizations that pay me for consultation and grants. Like that's the only way I live. So it really is dependent on the community around me for helping that work, because yeah, cultural work and artist work is really, really important work, but yeah, it doesn't always pay, unfortunately. I wish it did more, but I'm still living and breathing and fighting every day through survival mode, and just yeah, just the symptoms of colonialism. Like I could put it more blunt, you know, just like, you know, it's just hard living life out here as a native. I wish I could put you in my brain sometimes. But yeah, let me put some of I don't know, some of my stuff in here.
Context, kind of like what the picture looks like. How many congregations, at least of UU, do you guys know of in your immediate area that you could drive to tomorrow if you needed to have a place for respite, a place for counsel, a place for prayer, a place to connect, right, to your spirituality? There's not one sweat in Detroit. There are in private residences outside of Detroit, but I don't got a place to go. I don't got a piece of land that is holding a sweat lodge right now that I can go to get relief, to pray, to be with my ancestors. Sorry about the children in the background. My nephews just got home. That I can, you know, and that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of, it's not even about, you know, the bigger picture of land back. We don't have the smallest parcel of land. AIHS, American Indian Family Health Services, it's like everything is controversial. You know, they're run in a colonized way. They're funded by grant money. Communities still can't access them as a resource. So I can't, that question about who in Southwest can we donate to, I wouldn't trust to give your money to IHS because it's still not
Yeah,
gonna.
they're literally they come out of the Department of the Interior, which is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So it is quite literally run by the government employing Native people.
Yeah.
So
Highly
that's
regulated.
the same thing. Like why I don't want, you know, I wouldn't want people to give the tribal governments. Like there's a degree, like even with politicians, like would I like more Native politicians? Like I would feel better, but that's still not our system,
Exactly.
you know?
I've been told to run for office many times. People are like, you're smart, you're educated, you should do that. And I was like, why would I subject myself to that culture?
I'm trying to deconstruct those systems. Like
Exactly.
I'm trying to like again, if we go back to land and we think about the impact of this land, like for me personally, I represent a web in my community, and the people I know, the people I uplift, the people that I help employ from time to time. You know, I run a festival in the city and I do all sorts of cultural work. I'm trying to do some programming in the city. You know, for me, if I had a space, just me alone, if I had a space, it would give me opportunity to have feasts, to have that sweat lodge there. I can hold ceremony and fires, and I have a pipe. You know, those things are really like important. That is our church. That is our prayer. That is our way of connection. And like same for Jake. If Jake had a house, I know hands down that would be like, Jake, can we have a feast there? Would be no problem. The fact that we can't even gather under one space right now without it being some like just the semantics of it, the organization, or just, you know, like it's so different meeting in, you know, I'm sure all of you understand, it's so different meeting in a church. A church is a formal institution versus if you have like say a prayer meeting or something at somebody's house, or you just get together for dinner. You know, like for us Native people, we're always craving that feeling of being home, and having that little bit of land back in any capacity really could bring just a little bit that sense of home. I mean, we're foreigners here on our own land. We don't have a grocery store. There's no Native neighborhood you can go to. I mean, there's no like, yeah, like Jake said, like a sweat lodge. Like we're really like out here. Like I'm not saying it for oppression Olympics, but I mean, even like, you know, there's whole neighborhoods that are other just ethnic groups, you know, or even laugh like the Amish get to be left alone, you know. We don't have a space. This is our territory. You know, there's not a place that I can call home here, really. I rent an apartment. I'm dying renting this apartment. You know, I'm dying renting this apartment. I'm dying trying to buy groceries. Like, I think about this, like any native person that you can give land to, it would change their world. It would revolutionize their world. And depending on what kind of person that is, you might be taking care of a family. You might be taking care of a community because of if that person works in the community like that. And pretty much when you put a whole family together, that's enough to make a community. The impact is great. You can, for me personally, I know every native I've talked to, like if they got room in their house and somebody around them is homeless, that corner is theirs now. Like the way that it can keep people, like it's such a massive like sphere of influence once you give one native land.
I want to just jump in briefly because I think that that's so important and new for some people to hear about giving direct donations to direct people. And a lot of people think about giving donations and getting like a tax write-off with the donation and look forward to doing that. But I know it's something that our Surge chapter has been doing a lot of learning over the last few years and been intentional about direct giving to people, because you see where the money goes. You build the relationship with the people, you build trust with people, and then you know to give them your money. That was the other thing, Hadassah, you mentioned that I can really appreciate. Beyond education, finding real people, building relationships, especially people like the two of you who are open to building relationships with non-native folks. Build those relationships because then you learn things. I was actually just learned this weekend. I participated, a week ago, Monday on Indigenous Peoples Day. Hadassah led a water prayer walk at Belial, and I walked past the conversation, and it was with people that I cared about, so I kind of just leaned into the conversation. Jaike was a part of the conversation. They were talking about the American Indian Health Center. And so that was new information to me. If I wasn't connected to community, if I wasn't in relationship with people, I would have continued as I have been for the last 12 or 15 years, thinking that the American Indian and Family Health Center was a place led by natives in Michigan and the Detroit area who were well connected to community. And so I think that the better you can get connected and have direct conversations, both Jaike and Hadassah are involved, and they've shared a bit of that in the chat and verbally with organizations and grassroots stuff that they're involved in, that I'm sure they'd love to pull you into more. So we'll also share their contacts with you so you can reach out directly to build relations.
And if people don't have money, I have a dream, honestly. After coming off res last October, there were 4 deaths in a short span of 3 weeks, and they were all 24 years and younger. They were all preventable. They were all gruesome. There is a resource desert on almost every reservation in this country. And that being true means that people are dying in droves and dehumanized on another level. And I came off res feeling like I just need allies and accomplices that will help me build a supply chain, a mutual aid supply chain, to get things back to reservation spaces, like warm coats, warm gloves. They can't get gloves on Fort Peck, from a closet, like a church closet, because the church demands that you go to that church, and that means you have to practice their ways and assimilate again. And this is generationally very traumatic for us to have to subscribe to Christian ways in order to get a coat. And I see people walking along Highway 2 in my reservation with a windbreaker on, and it's -10 degrees outside, no gloves. We need supplies, and supplies that aren't attached to the government. And I don't want a nonprofit. I want it to be grassroots, but I want some kind of system that if allies could start to help me put into fruition, would look like finding ways to get supplies, mutual aid funds, and necessities to reservation spaces where they are completely cut off from urban spaces. Where here I had to bring my nephews here when I was asked to take custody of them, because I knew I could get resources in Michigan, right? I knew I could get resources in Detroit, where I knew I wasn't gonna get anything on the res, not from tribal and not from outside sources in Newtown or out in Webo, anywhere. It's too disparate, it's too isolated. I had to bring them here if I was going to have a chance at raising them with some kind of access to upward mobility, or with just any kind of resources at all. And it still took me fighting 6 times for Medicaid, 6 times for EBT to get these boys health coverage and food in our house. And as hard as that fight was, at least I finally got it, you know? So that idea of reservation spaces are drowning, we need to help them. I want help with that. That's a direct ask to community that you guys can float, building websites, building a supply chain, building a system of getting money directly into the hands of Indians on reservation spaces with no application process, with not having to jump through any hoops through DHS or IHS, none of that. If somebody needs money, they can have it, because poverty is what's killing us the most.
I want to be really, really like vulnerable for a second and just admit this to somebody, because I think people really need to like understand. And I'm not putting this out here to like be arrogant. I just want to like preface with this, like, I was just written up in like the Metro Times. I think Channel 7 came out, you know, like forward facing. I look like I'm a really well taken care of person. So for the last 4 months, I've been dealing with like trying to keep my rent paid on time and like trying to evade having an eviction notice, right? Like there's this statistic that just blew me away. It just blew me away. And I think it's absolutely true, because the amount of natives that I know that are struggling with just basic survival of like having a place to live is incredible. So for every dollar that a white person has, a native has 8 cents, 8 pennies to every dollar. Mm-hmm. And that's very, very real. I myself, you know, like I'm not rich doing what I do. Some of it is because I choose to live in my culture, you know, because there's certain luxuries that I do choose to give up. But some of it is just because of this particular system, you know, where we're just now starting to get to a point where we're valuing native knowledge. You know, I was doing a presentation for Bioneers, and I remember I got a bunch of I can't remember what it was. It was a similar kind of talk. I think I was talking about some history and like concepts of, you know, decolonial theory and land back. And at the end of my talk, when I got all the feedback cards, you know, most of them were good. Most of them were great. People really loved it. There was one card that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And it was just like, he just basically slammed me for not having real facts, and that personal stories and anecdotes are not science and like concrete history. And like, oh man, the way that like boiled my blood a little bit to just continually still be discredited while doing this work was like, oh my God, like we need the education. But that being said, you know, like people are just starting to realize where the gap is. I mean, why are we having this conversation, this, you know, webinar right now? It's because we are coming to a point, things are coming to a head, realizing we were not taught what we were supposed to be taught about the people here. Even me, I don't know all the tribes in Turtle Island. I'm still learning about a lot of them because I wasn't taught either. I was in this public school system. I was not taught either, you know? So when it comes to land, and giving that back, you know, one time this bookstore in Detroit offered to give land back to me. And I was so disheartened when they told me what was actually up. I was like, oh, okay. They're like, we got this plot of land behind our bookstore, you know, it'd be nice if you grew like some corn there. We have some garden beds, and you know, we just want to like, you know, give that to you as a form of land back. And I was like, oh, awesome. Like, is this going to be like a land transfer, or like, how do you want to do this? And they're like, oh, we didn't think, you know, we just thought we'd let you like, you know, use the land. I was like, man, this is not land borrow. Like last time last time we borrowed something out, it never came back. You know, like we let the colonizers borrow the land, and then it was suddenly theirs, and there was a fence, you know. So yeah, I don't want it to turn into that kind of situation. Like, please don't offer me to bring my like heirloom corn to your land, you know, to borrow your land. Like, you know, just please don't do that. Like,
Hadassah, that reminds me of I came to you with this excitement. I can't remember the school now because after I talked to you, I kind of erased it. Was it Oakland University that did this land back? And you were telling me like, oh no, it's not what it sounded like in the article. Do you remember that?
it's still in like the OU's property, I'm pretty certain. There's a funny story with that. So I believe OU just like, you know, I don't think they actually deeded them the land, but I do think that they are stewards of that land now, you know. But and that's a really vague word too. Like, I don't want to. I'm really sorry to say this, but I can't be in that position of trusting folks. You know, like historically, it has not worked out well. It would be much more to any Native person's power to own land. Again, I don't know many natives that own land, but OU was a funny thing though, because somebody made a typo. They were only supposed to get 1 acre, and somebody made a typo and actually accidentally put 5. So now it's like in the contract, and they have 5 acres of land. So more power to them.
But it's important to understand that we literally couldn't leave reservations until like the 70s. We had to get tickets to get off of our own land to come visit off res. And that's where like the whole concept of concentration camp came for Hitler. So it's like there is a lot of damage done, a lot of like we were asked to give up our land for white settlers, and then even to visit off and to be a part of the world, we've been restricted. So there's a lot of distrust between Native communities and white peoples. Just know that, because I think a lot of white people do have the intention, the good intention of wanting to build community with Native peoples, but you've got to educate yourself first to know how to walk in Native communities, you know, ask us questions up to a certain point and then take that education, because that damage has been so grave. And it's hard. It's hard to have to relive your trauma to ask for a handout from white settler descendants. It's really, really hard. And it's painful. Like that I have somebody paying half my rent so that me and 2 Indian children have a roof over our head. I've always been a good worker, always been a hard worker, been able to support myself. And that's the situation I find myself in after a ton of PTSD, a ton of anxiety disorder, and a ton of chronic pain has landed me in a position where I cannot take care of myself the way I used to. And that's the case for a lot of Native Americans. They are suffering so drastically from PTSD that they are self-medicating and they cannot take care of themselves. If they just had the freedom of knowing the rent was paid, of knowing their utility bills were paid, just
of having a car.
Yeah,
having a car, that's a big thing.
My nephew couldn't get his car out of impound when his stepmother borrowed it when she was pulled over. The cops found meth in it on Fort Peck. 11 months later, I have a rental car. I have to go pick him up in Wolf Point, which is 25 miles from Poplar, which is where the car was impounded, to go get that car, there were 5 trips back and forth between the police department, over to the gas station, back to the police department to get the right keys. It was insanity. And 11 months kept that car from that nephew who had a 1-year-old son. He wasn't even 1, he was 6 months at the time. And kept him from upward mobility, kept him from getting a better job, kept him from providing for his family. So he just stayed in the cycle of self-medicating, you know, and by the time I left, he was back to drinking again. And his baby mama was back to getting mad again, you know, and that's the cycle that we're in.
And I think people think that like I've heard this a lot, like people think natives get money. No. Like, okay, like let me tell you, I forgot my original point when I was talking last time, but like, okay, so I'm like with an eviction notice with my tribe, right? I literally like am calling them and I'm like, okay, I might get an eviction notice. Is there any assistance? And they're like, yeah, we have assistance. They guide me to a website where I have to fill out this paperwork. I have to, with no car, get to a mail, what's the word? Mailroom. Hello. Why can't I? Post office. There we go. I have to get to a post office and mail this thing out, potentially get it like notarized. So that's another trip with no car. Like, I'm just like thinking of the obstacles for other people that might be in like a less, not as good of a position as I am. I'm not even in that great a position, but either way, so then I fill out this application, the max amount of money they can give me for rental assistant, and I can only take it out every 4 years. It's $400. So the fact that people think, and like, okay, let me also explain to you too. So on the flip side, our tribal government, one of our, again, traumatized people, like I don't totally demonize them, but I'm just going to be honest with you. So a couple of years ago, one of our tribal counselors ended up taking a big chunk of money from the economic development board of our tribe. So basically like, yeah, like the business branch of our tribe. He ended up taking some money, funneled it to the tribe, totally embezzled it so that he could buy himself a Rolex watch. The tribe can only offer me $400 every 4 years though.
My tribe just
This
signed
is the
over
dilemma we're in. It's like,
$2.25 million. Nobody knows where it went. It's been talk of the chat for months now. Where did the money go? Why did we lose it? That was money that could have saved generations of MHA members. But the corruption in tribal councils, because they came up in scarcity and because they experienced such a lack of resources, is that those tribal council jobs are guaranteed income. They're guaranteed, you get rapport, you get people that look at you like you're important. And for people who have just been, again, systematically oppressed and beat down over and over, the corruption that exists and the nepotism that exists in these small communities keeps that those tribal councils very corrupt. And that's why the importance of don't just donate to a tribal council, because you don't know who's extorting that money and exploiting it. Are they sober? Are they working their traditions? Are they practicing their culture? Because there's a good chance they're not. And if they're not, they're a colonizer council, which means they're acting like the United States government, which means that their people. I have one nephew that's registered in Fort Peck. The other one's registered in MHA with me. The kid that's registered in Fort Peck gets $125 a year. $125 a year per cap is all he's allotted. There's no casino on Fort Peck. There's no oil royalties. There are out of MHA, but he didn't get that. That's not where he's registered. So it's like that, again, that false narrative that we're living off of casino money and that we don't pay taxes is a lie. People think
it's like a catch-22.
All of like, I got $35,000 still in college debt. Why? If I went to college as an enrolled native,
don't you get free college? Like, no, it doesn't happen everywhere.
That's what
there's a lot of these really negative, damaging stereotypes that have really like made it so people don't understand. Like we're the poorest people in America. Like straight up, we are the poorest people in America. And from a tribe that is not that considerably poor, there's homeless veterans that live in my territory, you know? Yeah, it's the amount of need and just, you know, when I really talk to folks and I really like non-natives and I really open up about some of our problems, I can tell it overwhelms a lot of people because of the sexual abuse, the drug abuse, you know, the things we had to survive. And it's just a lot. It's just a lot. And I hate to say it, but man, like money doesn't fix everything, but man, can it create like, it gives you power in this society. And whether I like the society or not, we're locked into this. And so to me, when you help out Native people in that way, it gives them the power to change their circumstance. You know, what if you're giving money to a Native business owner who's a woman who, you know, for some reason couldn't get home you know, the way she could. Now she has funds to go, you know, get like an Uber or a Lyft and not have to depend on hitchhiking or like, you know, a friend or something potentially dangerous. Like this is a large part of missing and murdered Indigenous people prevention work. This gives us space to be able to practice our ways, so that that directly lines up with our rights over religion, you know, and reclaiming that. But it all starts with land back, really. Land back is the most potent and powerful form. I was always told that land is really where the power is here in capitalism. And I think that's absolutely true. If you can own land, you know, like for us Native people, we're walking where our ancestors once walked, you know, it's so deep for us, you know.
Before before you look at that chat question,
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to say that we've got so many folks from so many different places on here, and I'm certainly going to continue to hold on to that thread conversation that Jake, you were talking about getting resources to reservations, and talk to other folks about how who might be interested in helping to coordinate something like that. So if you're not already directly connected to me or Moosechin, and that sounds like something you'd like to get involved with or support, I'm going to put my email in the chat so you can follow up directly with me so I have your contact information. I know that Unitarian Universalists and a lot of good white folk like to do service projects. It feels good. We like to collect things and buy things and give things. And so now I hear you saying, here's a way to move that. I wanted to throw another question in that I hear, you know, Hadassah said earlier to me, you don't know what you don't know. And it's so true. And one thing that I have heard so many times in the last year since doing this intentional work with Unitarian Universalists, it's kind of like a two-part. And then I'd like either of you to just kind of respond with what first comes to your mind to answer this. And then we can look at Randy's question, which is, are there housing programs that support Native Americans that seem to be working, which is kind of a little bit connected to this. But what I've heard is, do Native Americans still live on reservations? And do all Native Americans live on reservations? I've heard both of those questions from different people. And so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I live in Detroit, so and some people call Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County the biggest res in Michigan. There's more natives here. There's so many natives here. I don't even know what the direct census number is. It's a surprising amount of natives here. I think it's 20,000 just in Wayne County. 20,000 natives. I don't know where they're all at, but they're here. So, yeah, do natives still live on reservations? Okay, so really quick, like really quick history. So residential schools happen, and we can always come back and hopefully talk about this other stuff, and we'll drift like cliff notes through this. Residential schools, okay, even before that we were put on reservations, we were put on barren land, we were given government rations, and then from there they took away our children and they put them into residential school. While residential school is happening in the 50s, they did something called relocation. So it's really called the Relocation Act. There's actually documentaries about this. Just natives from all over, different tribes all over Turtle Island were brought to places like Colorado, like Denver, brought to San Francisco, brought to Detroit. So that happened here in Detroit. There's 120 different tribal nations represented in Detroit here at one point. So we were forcefully assimilated into the cities, and then a lot of us moved back during federalization with the promise of housing and being able to be on our own land in our reservation and have resources, which ended up being a false promise in history. So we're around, we're everywhere.
Yeah, people still live on reservations because if you leave a reservation and you are darker than myself and you are the color of my dad, if you leave, people don't think that racism still happens to Native Americans. That's the most mind-blowing thing as a Native American to me, living off res, is that people they don't understand that little boys in Oklahoma are still getting their braids cut. Billboards in South Dakota are still posting on their messaging sign, natives not welcome here. The amount of racism that's very blatant in Native communities is huge. So you're not safe to leave the reservation, but you're not safe to stay on the reservation either because there's so much trauma there. And that's the problem we have to face living off res. As urban Indians, there's a trade-off of, okay, I'm I'm leaving my people. Whatever healing I could bring to them as a sober person who's been sober for 2 decades now, 21 years, with a ton of, healing behind me, I could bring that to my reservation and try to help and make a change. But I can't, because my PTSD is too strong that every day there's a new murder. There's a new teenager who's being sliced in the head with machete. There was one of those deaths that I was talking about of the 4 last year was a 6-month-old girl who had been raped to death by her grandfather and had a heart attack. That's sickness. That is the end result of so much trauma happening to you and your family that you don't know yourself anymore. You have lost your soul. I can't live on res and expect to have a safe life. As
For
a
a job, honestly. Like,
right.
there's even just basic survivability. Like, how do you live? Like, you could work at the tribal casino like everybody else for $12 an hour.
So I had to trade off my loyalty to my people, and I have since I was 16. Since I started going back to my res, I have had to trade off feeling like a traitor, having white passing privilege, knowing I could get more upward mobility if I stayed off res, knowing that my family back on Fort Peck is dying in addiction and alcoholism, and that they're not going to get the access to the right kind of tools that I can get because they can't get access to that little bit of cash or that little bit of stability because there's one trauma after another on reservations. So the cultural obligation, right? That's why I work as hard as I do off res and why I have to be as honest as I am, because I have a little more safety than my family does back on Fort Peck, who are fighting for survival every day, especially the women, right? The MMIW, people don't talk enough about it. And the violence against women. There was a law, Oliphant versus Suquamish, which I talked about a little bit a week ago in my last talk, that made it legal for white people not to be prosecuted on reservation land for breaking laws. That turned over to sovereignty and to the FBI was supposed to take care of those crimes. White people know that. White people know that about reservations, so they can go and commit crimes all the time against our women and steal our children and traffic them. And this is why pipelines are such a big deal, right? Is because every time a pipeline goes in the ground for oil extraction, the element of man camps becomes higher, and man camps mean women are going to be trafficked. They're going to be kidnapped and trafficked, and we're going to lose more children to sex trafficking along a pipeline. That to me feels like it wouldn't matter if we even had sovereignty, right? Because there's still this element of the corruption in the United States government that the Supreme Court agreed to, that said, we are all right with white people going and committing crimes on reservations, and then having a different entity have to deal with it. We just wash our hands of it. And what are we supposed to do to protect ourselves, right? We don't have any protection from the government or from each other because we've all been dehumanized, and hurt people. And there's nobody else that's listening. So we turn on each other. And the lateral violence is a huge problem in Native communities, because if anybody gets that little bit of resource, like a backpack, a pair of Jordans, my boys talk about it all the time, wanting a pair of Jordans. They get Jordans from Goodwill here. I find some damn good Jordans for $15, and I make sure they're walking around with Jordans. But I'm not buying $100 pair of Jordans. If they had those on the res, they would have been stolen already. And their life would have been put in
beat
danger.
up. They would have been beat up, man.
Their life would have been put in danger, and they are 8 and 9. There would have been a fight. One of them would have been beaten over those shoes, because that dehumanization factor is so grand. So that's, again, we live on res, we live off res, we live where we have to survive, and there's always a trade-off, and it feels really, really bad.
Yep.
Hey, we have until 8:30 to hold the space. Also 2 hours is a long time for most people on an evening, and especially for our guests who are sharing so deeply and transparently, and I appreciate it. And I've been thinking, I haven't known either one of you long enough yet, but I've known you long enough to know how much brilliance and wisdom and knowledge you hold. And I've just been sitting here today in awe. I already knew that about you, and I'm still sitting here in awe because you hold so much. And And Hadassah, you know, you said I went to Detroit Public Schools. Well, I did too. We didn't learn this in school. And Jake, you just said the piece that just hit me. It's my cultural obligation. It's a cultural obligation. And it's so devastating to me that the two of you, with all of the light and creativity and love that you have had to spend so much time intentionally learning all of what you're sharing with us. Certainly some of it has been passed down, you've heard stories, but it's obvious that you have intentionally studied and looked up things and learned and remembered, you know, even all of the things that your brain is holding. And I just am so grateful that you're here sharing that with us tonight. I'm so grateful that I'm here to listen to you tonight. I am learning more and growing and stretching myself. I'm thinking, okay, Jake has a cultural obligation. I have a cultural obligation too. I have a obligation as a colonizer's descendant to do more research of my own history, of my own people and what they did. The bad stuff I'm sure I'm going to find out about, and hopefully I found a few more good nuggets along the way, but I feel more obligated to learn that after being here today. And I also feel more obligated to listen to this again and again, take notes, go back to my online class that I've been, and take more notes and read more notes and follow more links and hold more of what you have to be responsible for holding in your brain so that I can share more of that out as my work, because you shouldn't have to be so responsible for doing all this work. And I just hold so much gratitude and so grateful that I'm in community with both of you, because I love ya. I wanna open up the space to the full room to see if anybody else has thoughts, questions, their own personal experiences or things that they want to share. I know we're not all descendants of white colonizers in this space today. And so let's hear from everybody. I guess I want to say put things in the chat or raise your hands. And I'm gonna try to take our spotlight off so we can see everybody.
We want a Native Community Center so bad, but we want it not attached to grant money from the government. Don't make us go to IHS for it, because it's all—
Or a nonprofit.
Yes.
We want a grassroots, a grassroots center, because that seems to be the most impactful.
If we had a culture house where we could gather and no strings attached to the government, where you could walk in, there's a mixing studio for the teens that want to mix audio, there's a paint studio for the kids that are fucking artists, you know, and there's a kitchen where we can cook and feed each other, that would bring so much healing to our communities. And if there was a sweat lodge outside, right, and some trees and an arbor, and that's what we're aiming for. And the collective I work with has been trying to do some kind of work around that, but it's fleeting, you know, it's fleeting to try to like shop yourself to funders and say you are a mutual aid collective that doesn't require application processes to just give money away to Native people. People don't want to fund us, right? And that's what we're up against, is the formalities of capitalism and colonization keep us from getting that land. I would love a culture house so much.
Yeah, it's my dream to have like kind of like an Anishinaabe rooted, but like intertribal, because everyone deserves to call where they're living home, even if we are guests, you know. And sometimes there's a lot of trauma where that makes it not feel like that. And I just want to, personally, it is my dream to have a land-based project along with a city project. And that was modeled by my cousin in Northern California with his tribe. So he spent a lot of time in an urban population, Oakland, California. And then a few years, 10, 15 years ago about now, he bought some land. He ended up having, I think, a little bit of money from his grandmother's will, just enough to buy a small plot of land. And now he has a earthen studio there and does a lot of like land-based work. For me, I feel like a cultural house is great and things can be done in the city, but I also dream of just having like an outside the city space as well, because our connection to the land is of the utmost importance. I mean, I think any normal person, after spending time in such a condensed space and just going into like a park or something, like you literally are just from all that city energy. Somebody asked how much a lot in the city costs, and I think, well, here's the thing. A lot would be helpful. We wouldn't be able to run ceremony in the lot though, because in order to run ceremony, you'd need it to be in a place where somebody is actively taking care of the ceremonial space and guarding it, aka I think it would only work with somebody living there and or a collective living in a space. So that's the dream. Is there any guidance you can offer for Thanksgiving, or is there a way to I've heard of people calling it Thanks-taking, which I like. Personally, my favorite way of celebrating is at sunrise ceremony on Alcatraz Island in the Bay Area. They do a huge intertribal, anyone can be there, sunrise ceremony on the island, which was a large, if you don't know about the occupation on Alcatraz, I would highly, highly, highly recommend looking up some documentaries on it, or just some information, some books. It was one of the most powerful moments of modern indigenous resistance in the last several decades. So they still commemorate it by having sunrise ceremony. But you know, Thanksgiving, I was just talking with my niece about this. I think it's a funny holiday for Natives to celebrate. We did have our fall harvest, and it's also the time for our ghost suppers. So I think if you want to somewhat decolonize Thanksgiving, it's a time to help honor the dead, and a time to honor the harvest, honor the last little bit of light before we go to a dark winter, dark and hopefully snowy. I'm waiting for the snow this year. But yeah, you know, that's the way that I would do it, and gather with your friends. Like, I'm very in support of Friendsgiving. That feels like a very beautiful way to redevelop that into something more meaningful than this idea that the Pilgrims and Indians had a little meal together.
I consider it a day of mourning, and I hold it for that space for the people who have died under the misconception that it was about, you know, giving and about a community, because there were like very specific incidents on that day that happened, the Pequot and the tribes on the Northeast coast. But I also serve, you know, back to community. Like, I've done a lot of like food banks or homeless shelters on Thanksgiving Day. The intertribal question, the dream, right? There's the medicine wheel that somebody came up with in the 70s that is the red, the yellow, the black, brown, and the white. You don't have to have a tribe if you're white. However, you have to know your roots, you know, and how maybe your ancestors practiced. And I do like the idea of, you know, researching how your ancestors were connected to the land, and what kind of ceremony they had with the land, what kind of practices they engaged in before they did become colonized, so they can understand a little more of like why we are the way we are as Native Americans. And at that point, you know, maybe that seventh generation prophecy, medicine wheel medicine can start to actually, you know, kind of come to the surface with regard to the brown and the white coming together, and the black and the yellow and the red, and all of the, you know, different mixed races. We as Native people, that's how you have the Métis up in Canada. It was like French settlers with Native peoples that lived there, mixed and had lots of, and they became a whole ass race of people, right? Mm-hmm. That's because they were not against bringing people in. They were not against adopting white people. They saved a lot of white people's asses because people were starving to death, didn't know how to grow food. We wanted to take care of people. We've never been against mixing. So that's true. And yet the distrust that is there, there's got to be a lot of work done to heal those wounds. So intertribal, no, you don't have to belong to a tribe. Just be caring with us, you know, I wouldn't say just gentle, but knowledgeable. Ask questions.
It's gonna always feel better when I hope that there's a point like this with this crew or some of the folks here, if I ever meet you out in the world, that if we ever talk, that it's more about what you can also bring to the table and not just what I'm telling you. Because, well, I mean, the reality too is I'm half white. So well, sort of. My family is Gypsy Romani and also Slavic, right? So we're Polish Ukrainian. And that culture right there is a woodland culture. The old Slavs, the way that they practiced, there's a lot that actually is relatable between all tribes. And that's the thing, that's our point of contact. The more that you learn about who your tribal people were pre-colonialism, because colonialism is very deep in Europe or wherever you're from, really. But that colonialism is really deep, but there was always an indigenous person that you came from. So relate on those ways, because I like to hear about that. I have some of my best friends are Irish, and I love hearing about the Irish ways. Irish people are some of the highest grade people I've met too, with their story of resistance. Like there's a lot that coincides with our stories. And that always feels so much better when we can culturally share, as opposed to me like always talking at people. Obviously, this is designed differently. However, in conversation, when we're really connecting as a community, right?
Yeah, the Squacky settlement, it shouldn't have been bought back. It should have been given back to them. It's like, why did they have to, after my talk at the UU out in Farmington, a kind and well-intentioned man was like, in Maine, the casino that the native tribe there raised money from eventually got to them to the point where they could, buy a lot of their land back. And if I want to be, how did he say it? If I want white people to like me or something, that I need to get rich. And my brain blew up at that point, and I had a big moment, a big reaction. I kept it to myself, and I was kind to him afterwards, because those are our ways, and I just tried to educate. But they shouldn't have had to buy that land back either. They shouldn't not have to buy. Belle Isle belongs to the Anishinaabe here. It needs to go back to the Anishinaabe. That was a very sacred place for Anishinaabe, and it doesn't belong to Detroit. But yet that is how it is. If white accomplices wanted to get together and do the work of having the government in this city turn that island back over to the people it belongs to, that would be baller.
Man, you know how impactful it would be if every person here, now that they know a little bit more about natives, whenever there's a space of education or a space of power exchange, just a simple questions of, well, are there any native people here? What do the native people think? We should talk to the native people. That's such a simple but powerful thing in each and every one of your spaces, because it's relevant. If you work in the health field, that's relevant. We need native people contributing on a lot of that data, because it's incomplete. Any education, if you're a teacher and you're wanting to do, I don't know, whatever, really. What do the native people have to say about some of these things? Wherever it's applicable. In your eyes, I would love to find ways to bring natives more to the table, because we have a lot of knowledge. The state does own Belle Isle, I believe. Yeah, the DNR
Yeah, it's a
also
state park.
owns it. Yeah.
Mhm.
It is a state park.
90 years. You gotta be kidding me. Well,
Yeah, the city also couldn't take care of it, so it was like
Mhm.
it was rough. I feel that.
they could have given it back to the Anishinaabe after the city couldn't handle it. Why wasn't that a first thought? And it's because erasure is such a big, I really want people to take that away. Erasure of Native Americans is so profound. We're not talked about in race issues. We're not talked about in politics. We don't have, until you saw Reservation Dogs, how many television shows, how many movies had you seen with like Native representation? I can
Mhm.
on hand.
Yeah, and I grew up like that. I grew up seeing that. Like I grew up, or rather not seeing it.
Northern Exposure in the 90s had a native female character that didn't have a speaking part. That's the last time I remember a Native American actor in a mainstream television show. So when it comes down to like a lot of this stuff is the first time you guys are hearing it, that's the same for all of America.
I
Because
remember, I
government
remember
doesn't
very
want this stuff known.
specifically, I remember there was an episode of Seinfeld and he had like a native girlfriend and he kept making jokes about reservations. And it was just like such a like, like we're still making these jokes. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Because erasure is so profound, and they think that that should be that way again because we were conquered in the minds of a lot of white settlers, and that's why Columbus Day hurts. You know, I don't celebrate Indigenous Day on Columbus Day because the government made us share it with a colonizer, like with the genocide.
Yeah, that's like Hitler Day or like Netanyahu Day. Like
we have to fight
great.
white settlers on that day who are doubling down about we won. We took over your land, you guys, you know, lost it, so it's ours to have. Instead of celebrating Indigenous history and culture that day, we have to fight other people about how our genocide played out, you know, and that's really, really hard. That the government, if they wanted to make reparations, if they cared, they would acknowledge the residential school era. They would acknowledge the 60s scoop. They would acknowledge the Buffalo kills. They would acknowledge how Abraham Lincoln committed the biggest mass execution on this country, you know, to this day, ordered the most hangings of any race of people. But they don't talk about this stuff because they're still complicit in it. And if we continue to die, they continue to get to take the land. So they're still invested in, like they're invested in Palestine. They run parallels. The reason why the United States government won't pull out of funding weapons over there is because they want that land just like they want the rest of the land that's here. That's why it's such a big deal to talk about erasure and what you guys don't know, you know, and to
Just
very much educate yourself.
Just to go back to a little bit of like some land back. First off, I can't believe some of you are still here. And in the last 10 minutes, I think it might be interesting to talk about really quick, maybe a little moment of where land back was successful, or at least to some degree, right? Because we think us being America this long and still having this many natives around, that we would have gotten more land back by now. But here's the thing, we run on international treaty law. The only really kind of governing body to hold anything accountable is the UN. And guess who's a part of the UN? All the very colonized countries. So while we do have the upper hand of it being under an international treaty law, it often gets overlooked, and honestly, we just get gaslit in this system. But there was one pretty successful moment of land back, and it started with the occupation on Alcatraz. And I want to talk a little bit about the state of California, because again, this is how crazy it is. We know certain things about some of the laws. There's just certain things we can't do about it, you know, because it's just by design. We know our rights. We just can't always fight them back. So in the state of California, there's multiple treaties. There's this one treaty in particular, the Treaty of Laramie, and it basically states that any unused federal land shall go back to the native people. Now, there's also several treaties in the state of California, now, mind you, it's state governance, that are trying to have governance over federal sovereign entities, aka the native people. So those governing systems do not match. Actually, federal law supersedes state law, correct? So California treaties are actually only done within the state governance. They were never ratified by Congress. So by that default, they are not within our jurisdiction, and they just illegally took California Indians' land. Most of the land, even in Michigan, those treaties were ratified by Congress. That's what made them binding, because we're under something called limited sovereignty, at least within the US understanding of it, not necessarily our understanding of it. So that limited sovereignty is what just basically tells us that Congress are the only ones that can tell us what to do. So state law technically doesn't really apply to us. We just kind of do it because there's a bunch of other little laws that make us complicit in order to be within the state government. But because we're federal tribal people, we run on a totally different, we actually supersede federal law. We are international treaty law, but nobody wants to see it that way. But in the 70s, I believe it was the 70s, I used to remember the exact date and all these little facts, but you can always look it up. It's a really great story. So in, oh, it actually says here, 1969, so right at the turn into the 70s, was the occupation of Alcatraz. This was during the American Indian movement. If you've never heard of them and their story, incredible. They've done some incredible feats for Native people, getting some you know, laws into place to help protect us. Just some of the most incredible shows of intertribal solidarity. And so, yeah, occupation of Alcatraz. So Alcatraz, the prison, had just closed about like 6 years, 4 years or something like that prior to their occupation. And so according to the treaty law, any unused federal property has to go back to Native people. So there's this big island prison in the San Francisco Bay. So if we just kayak out there, by federal law, it goes back to us, right? So that's exactly what they did. And for 2 years, they occupied the island. They set up a school, they set up a kitchen, so everybody got fed. And they completely graffitied the entirety of Alcatraz. If you go to Alcatraz today, you will be welcomed by one of the biggest signs that say Indians allowed. And it's just graffitied on the big old prison sign when you go in there. I've been to Alcatraz a lot for the different gatherings that they have, and it's always to commemorate that. Now, the federal government did, you know, make some kind of silly little clause and ended up getting them removed because they reconstituted it as, I believe, a park now, or a historical site, which is a really sneaky little way to make it like federally used property again. But for 2 years, there was an occupation, and I have had the joy of spending a lot of time with elders in San Francisco and Oakland who were either on the island as kids or had parents that were there on the island. And it's the coolest thing. I'm gonna go cry thinking about it. Because I remember this one kid, he was maybe, he's an elder now. He said when he was a kid, he was about 5 years old, 6 years old, and they pulled up on the kayaks and he got to the land and he said his uncle was already there. And his uncle looked at him and said, "You're the freest you're ever going to be. You're the freest you're ever going to be here. You're a free man here." And it was true. Everything worked, you know, the way it should have, the kitchens, the schools, everything. And while we didn't get Alcatraz Island, a lot of smaller movements were spurred out of that bigger movement, which included just north of San Francisco Bay, in an area of Sonoma County, in a little town called Forestville, there was an AIM occupation shortly after Alcatraz on land called Yakeyama. And another elder told me he remembers being a kid and watching AIM march up against the federal agents coming onto the land. And it was one of the first successful land back moments in American Indian movement history. So Yakeyama to this day is where, when I go to California, is a place that I go and participate in ceremony, and there's events there, and there's dances there, and it's in the hands completely of Native people, unceded territory. So there's moments, it's possible, and there's things that can be just as impactful as that, you know. Yeah, we have a lot of power as people together, and that's what I'm gonna preach until the day I die. Is anybody who wants to be together in the crew, let's go.
Seventh generation prophecy. It's that point in history now where settlers heal, right, their history, natives heal their history, and we come back together and build. Right now we move forward, having more answers, more insights. We've done our shadow work. We've like looked at our part, and we see, because the thing is like the harms that have come from colonization are happening to white settlers too. And we don't want that either. Like all the pollution, all of the lack of access to food, you know, food scarcity, all of the lack of access to housing. We don't want that as Native nations for even the white people and any descendant that comes here to live. So now we need to come together. We need to really dig deep about traditions and culture, and relying back on our principles and our values as people, which were there in your histories as well, but that you can study indigenous principles and see like they really had something good going for a long time, because everybody was well, everybody was cared for, in the sense that you couldn't, you know, necessarily like maintain all factors in your day. You might get eaten by a bear, but you know, like for the most part, they had systems and they had societies that were everybody thrived. And that's what we would like to see, is everybody coming together, everybody healing each other, everybody thriving from here on out. It's not just about the natives getting well, it's about all of us getting well.
And guess what, y'all? It's in our prophecies. It's in our prophecies that we are in a very auspicious time. We know that things are crazy right now. We know things are crazy. But here's the thing. The prophecy told us that the rest of the world would essentially be asleep, that they wouldn't remember their earth-based practices, that they're people, that they're children of the earth. They have those indigenous ways that their ancestors used to live in, just superior intelligence, no leaving no mark on the earth. That is superior intelligence, and we used to live like that, you know. And there's the prophecy tells us that it is the people of Turtle Island that will help bring the rest of the world back to those ways, for anyone who will listen. So you're a part of that. You're a part of that, yeah.
What a beautiful way to close our evening. And gosh, I just got to say again how much I love you both. And I'm sure everybody else here can see how Hadassah and Jaike, they would go on and on. They would keep going. And so invite them to keep going. Invite them to your congregations to speak on a Sunday morning or a social action meeting. Or Hadassah shared she would even be open to come and dance for you. Jaike spoke at the Farmington congregation on Sunday. And another friend of mine, Andrea Pierce, spoke at the Brighton Church on Sunday. And so invite them to speak. I'm dropping my email if anybody wants to follow up directly with me, particularly around Jaike's idea, and also just thinking more about land and how to help move some of our money, our personal money, our Unitarian Universalist money. Sharing of space isn't something that they automatically talked about, but as they were talking, I was reminded about her during the when Black Lives Matter movement first started. There was a lot of congregational conversations around sharing our space. No questions asked, no fees. We're not going to be there with you, but if you need a space to meet. I don't think that would completely meet all the needs that they have, but it certainly could provide some another way of giving, because we don't all have personal assets to share. But yes, thank you. Remember Hadassah's words. Talk to people you know, ask them the question, is there a Native in the room? Is there a Native in the city? Are we talking to them? Who's the people closest to us? What are they doing? And I'll share this video out with you. Please share this video out with as many people as you know. I'll include the resource list that Marie shared in the chat when I send the email list. Thank you, Jaike, for putting that together for us. Again, this is work that Marie last Sunday asked Jaike for a resource list. Jaike went home and compiled a resource list on her time, on her dime, and she's still spreading it with us. And so let's think about how much they are gifting with us, because they know what we don't know. We don't know, and we need to know to help join that the people with Hadassah and make the moves. Any last words from Hadassah and Jaike tonight?
I'm just grateful to just be listened to, you know, like that's huge. That's a huge part of like reparation work, you know, it's just listening and being present and you know the critical thinking behind it all. And I just invite you to just marinate on everything, our silly little musings to some of our historical facts to whatever just really that you know touched your heart.
Yeah, thank you for, you know, being willing to sit through my cussing and my very direct like I know it's uncomfortable, and that comes, you know, there's I lived in a resistance camp for 7 months and learned about the power of like rage and protest, but also with love. It comes from a place of love for all people, but for my people who are suffering gravely right now. And just to have, you know, having experienced erasure my whole life, and I'm 46, having a room full of this many people is huge, you know, that want to sit and listen to our message and take all of it in and be uncomfortable with us, because this stuff is not easy to digest. It's not easy to take in. You guys are doing the work of decolonizing. And if I could get every seat in America, every butt in every seat in America to also do this, we would be on our way to healing, you know? So it's more important than you realize that you guys showed up here and you sat through the whole thing, like Hadassah said, and that you took it all in and you asked questions. I love questions, and the more the better, because that helps break down the stigmas and the stereotypes around who we are as people and how we actually exist. So I put my information in the chat for anybody who wants to reach out and ask more questions. You've got that reading list on the drive that Marie, I think, posted in the chat earlier. And I'm available for any questions. It's about to be WWE in my shower because my boys are wild.
Also, we like food. If anyone wants to take us out to lunch anytime, we'd be gladly, you know, gladly a part of that.
I would go.
And I'm going to put you on the spot, but I want to send a special shout out to Mark and Randy, the two men that have stayed through the whole thing tonight. And I just reach out to, let's get more men involved in this work. I saw, I won't put you on the spot right now, but hey, Mark, in the somebody's one of your churches posted on Facebook today, you know, we have this event coming up and all the women have signed up to help clean up. Where are the men? And so thank you, Mark and Randy, for being some of the men that are going to work with us to help clean up this mess that some of our ancestors caused. Thank you for being here.
They've experienced a lot of power. You know, the white male descendant has experienced a lot of freedom, a lot of privilege due to the loss, you know. So it is important that you guys showed up, and not to, you know, just add that, you know, sweetness to it, but it is important. And truly, the more men, settler descendant men that get involved in this work, the better, because they're the ones that are still making decisions on a grand scale. And that's really been impacting not just Native communities, women's bodies, right? Like it runs a whole course. So it's and thank you for pointing that out, Jenny.
You're welcome. Yeah. So thank you all again. Randy Block, Director of Mooshin, Mary Jo, our current president, is here, and excited to see so many of you. The work will continue. If you missed the first two web events, they are on our website, the Mooshin uujustice.org. Share those out with folks. We will continue to add more resources to our website as well. And please share resources you have with me.
Jenny, can I say one thing?
Please.
The one thing, of course, that everybody's paying attention to is that there's an election coming up here in November. And an important part of that election is standing up for women's rights.
Thank you.
So that's where my heart is. I love my mother, I love my daughter, I love my wife, but it's a lot more than that. It's like women should have rights. And I think that's where I went way beyond one sentence, but I just wanted to say that we should be voting for our values this year.
I voted uncommitted today, Socialist Party, but I'm putting that out there only to say, like, yeah, the John Trudell said it in the 70s. that politics in this country are two wings of the same bird. So that Republican Democrat, where a native perspective is a concern, they are one and the same. But that said, you are right. There's going to be one party that has more care and concern for women's bodies, and that will bleed down into MMIW work, hopefully as well. So it's a good point.
Thank you again, all of you. I will be with you soon. Hey, my sister Audrey, it's good to see you. Let's chat soon. And I will wish you all a good evening.
Thank you,
Thank
Jenny.
you.
For having us. Bye.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Great job, Jennifer.
Thank you. So good to see you. Can you see where our
Good to
resemblance,
see
me
you
and
again,
Audrey?
Hadassah, after meeting you at the water walk.
Hi, Mary Jo.
Aw.
Hi, Audrey. Good to see you again.
I claimed
Good.
Audrey as my sister, and now when I look at us together in this line, we look alike.
Well, you're getting a little whiter in the hair there.
Uh-oh.
I am. It's all wisdom.
That's right. We're in elder territory.
I've been enjoying calling myself a yelder, young elder.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
My
there you
friend in
go.
Detroit, I think, may have coined that term, Tawana Petty. I said, yeah, that's where I'm at, yelder.
Hadassah, this was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here.
Well,
I
will
All
try
right.
to
Good
show
night,
this-
everyone.
I feel like Marsha's trying to unmute herself. You can just sign to us.
Oh, maybe I can help. I think I can help. Ask to unmute.
No, I was just trying to figure out how to get to the resources.
I think it's in the chat.
They're in the chat, but I will send them.
But the chat will
you.
disappear in a minute, right?
I will.
Yeah.
Yes. I would love to have one of you come to our fellowship in Midland. I will.
That's where you're from, Marcia.
It
Okay.
is.
Midland.
Mhm.
Good.
Yeah, we've been talking about having someone like you come. So this is perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great.
well, I'm excited because we have 3 UU churches working together, Petoskey, Marquette, and Badenoch.
Ah,
And we're looking for something we can do together. And one of our Marquette women was here tonight. And I'm thinking, maybe this is it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe this is a starting point.
I think
Yeah,
we
this-
need to join our UU tribe and see what we can do in collaboration with Hadassah and Jake.
I like that.
mhm.
Right?
How do you feel
Yeah.
about that UU tribe, Hadassah?
I like that. I'm all right with it.
Yeah, maybe I'm appropriating a term I should not. I'm actually just using it.
Just don't go
It's
too far to
not
say that we're gonna
literally.
have a powwow about it.
Not literally.
No, I like that. I think it can also mean like your family too. So I get that. I mean, this is English. We also didn't have this word, so it's like
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Great to see you all.
You too.
Good night.
Good
Good
night, everyone.
night.
All right, take care, y'all. I'm
Good
gonna get outta
night.
here.